being curious, being aware, having that perspective, and knowing the shoulders that you stand upon perhaps gives you a sense of understanding that you're able to put into your work as you come into these hallways every day here.
From the Nuba Mountains in South Sudan, I'm Steve Crump.
For now, we're at the White House. Steve Crump, WBTV, on your side.
Hello and welcome. I'm Steve Crump. Medgar Evers was a Mississippi native who was born in the town of Decatur. I'm Steve Crump in Johannesburg, South Africa. Thanks so much for watching.
Well, you know, I think from a very simple perspective, I've always thought of myself as a guy that just goes to work every day. This came after Ice Agents raided several food plants in Mississippi. I mean, I've always been curious about a lot of things, and I'll use this as an example. I can think back to where I was a senior in high school. I was the only African American in my class in this Third World Studies course. And it was when apartheid was at its peak in the mid-1970s. We had not heard the name Nelson Mandela or Desmond Tutu. And it was one of those things, just by the numbers in the aggregate, you had a population of 20 million, 16 million blacks being controlled by 4 million whites. And back in 1974, I knew that I would be in South Africa one day. And I went twice and did a couple documentaries from there.
2 to 3 million people call the South African township of Soweto home. And it is here that...
You know, for me, and the story I like to tell about coming to Charlotte, I remember a June 1983 article in Black Enterprise magazine, and it profiled the city. Harvey Gantt was in his first term as mayor. There were things happening at the airport. There was Sam Johnson, Lincoln Mercury, and I could kind of read about this town that was part of the New South. And I just kind of said to myself, it's like, gosh, that's where I want to be. And, you know, fast forward some 35 plus years later, and I'm still here, and the fact that I've been able to, you know, make it work in some form or fashion, I think in some regards, it's just been pretty amazing.
And instead of always covering the crime and things like that, he always finds, and this is what he says, I have a good in the hood story. And when he says he has a good in the hood story, the producers say, Steve Crump, you go for it. You do that good in the hood story.
And I think it's about information that you have in your backyard. I mean, for me, having done a lot of documentaries on the African American experience, the civil rights experience.
From the Edmund Pettus Bridge, I'm Steve Crump. Thanks so much for joining us.
And, you know, everybody talks about people such as Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, John Lewis, so many of the luminaries. But all you have to do is look in our backyard here, where you've had people such as Franklin McCain, who initiated the sit-in movement in Greensboro. Dorothy Counts, who just went through abject hell to integrate Harding High School back in 1957. You had the situation where you had the bombings of the homes of Kelly and Fred Alexander, along with Julius Chambers and Reginald Hawkins. So Charlotte in the civil rights timeline, and you go right down the road to Rock Hill, South Carolina, and you had Jail No Bail. This area was very rich in a lot of those diamonds that people mined in terms of defining a legacy known as the civil rights movement.
I don't know if they ever made him like Steve to begin with. He is an original. And you look at who else as an African-American journalist interviews the KKK.
What's the message you all want to get out right now?
Our message right now is that whites in America need to.
Only Steve does. I can tell you when I first got to the market and was getting introduced, I finally had to tell Steve, all right, Steve, I can't meet any more people. He's so well connected, so well regarded. He knows everybody. His Rolodex is probably amongst the leaders in not only in Charlotte, but I'd put him up against anybody in any market in the United States.
He's taught me a lot about the city. He's a great role model in the newsroom. Taught us that, you know, it's important to work hard if you want to accomplish a lot in this business.
And I still want to be like him when I grow up.
Yeah, right.
I think that we as a community are especially blessed to have a personality such as Steve. His ability to report the news, but it's also his ability to connect with people in the community and to be a part of the community.
He is like one of a kind, and there's nobody like Steve Crump, and nobody can tell a story like Steve Crump. Nobody can do a documentary like Steve Crump. Nobody can interview somebody like Steve Crump. Nobody can take on the controversial issues like Steve Crump. He's one of a kind.
If there is a subtitle to a Steve Crump story, I think it would have to be inclusion. It would be opening doors. It would be demonstrating awareness within a community. It would be showing the possible as far as what can happen, not only as a journalist, as a storyteller, but also in terms of how we engage. And I think that in some respects, it's just the adage of being open and realizing, how things have changed all for the better within this community. And perhaps that's the subtitle of my story. I was diagnosed last year with colon cancer. And what was going to be some routine treatments turned into hell in a handbasket, to be quite blunt. I ended up contracting MRSA. I was in the hospital for some 51 days. And at one point, I was on a ventilator, dialysis, feeding tube. My right lung had collapsed. And quite candidly, a lot of people didn't expect me to make it.
First, we are really thrilled to have Steve Crump with us. He's been in our living rooms for years. It's been a big story.
We're optimistic. We're faithful, we're prayerful. I have a lot of support. I feel like we're going to beat it. We've come a long way. I mean, this kind of shocked me in a lot of regards, but the fight has been deep, but at the same time we're making strides, and with that I remain very optimistic. I think part of the significance of this award and of what Gerald Johnson and the folks at the Post Foundation have managed to do is empower this community. When you're able to impact education and help young people along, that's one part of it. But also too, when you look at the critical state that newspapers are in, especially black newspapers, and you go back this summer where the Chicago Defender had to shut down. I mean, I think that that's absolutely heinous. But at the same time, the folks of the Charlotte Post, under the leadership and guidance of a Gerald Johnson, they have found relevance in terms of where a black press is a meaningful press and is a press that can make a difference within a community. I didn't know that I was this strong. I didn't know I had this much fight within me. I didn't know I wanted to live this bad. And that's where it is. As I've said before, I don't want to die with my music left in me. I still have documentaries to do. There's still stories to tell. There's still people and communities to empower. And that's the Steve Crump that I want to be.
Steve Crump, WBTV, on your side.